Hey, welcome back to Reason and Theology, everybody. Thank you so much once again for your support doing a patron and channel member only video here. Asking the question, is Marcel Lefebvre a saint? I've heard a few weeks ago somebody on YouTube, popular, I say kind of popular, but I heard somebody on YouTube asserting that Marcel Lefebvre is a saint, and I see it going around again today. And so it does raise the question, okay, well, for those who would say that he's a saint, I mean, I'm not saying everybody who uses that term about him are actually suggesting he is, but some people are suggesting that he is. And so in reference to those who would suggest that he's a saint or think that he's going to be a saint, I think that there are some things to consider here. And so, one thing I want to do is consider him and then compare him to others, such as perhaps Gregory Palamas, and why in Eastern Catholicism we can consider Gregory Palamas a saint, but why Marcel Lefebvre is not a saint. Because some people will say, well, I mean, you have Gregory Palamas, right? He was in communion. He's a saint. You have Gregory of Narek, who's a doctor of church. But let's see if there's a difference. One major difference is Gregory Palamas, for instance, was never excommunicated by the church, whereas Marcel Lefebvre was specifically excommunicated. And unfortunately, to date, that excommunication has not been lifted. Some people think that it has been lifted. No, his personal excommunication has never been lifted. Take a look at this from the Sacred Congregation for Bishops in 1988. Lefebvre was warned if he goes through with consecrations, he's going to be excommunicated. He went through with them, knowing fully well, and here it is. Monsignor Lefebvre, Archbishop Emeritus of Toulon, notwithstanding the formal canonical warning of the 17th of June, last in the repeated appeals to desist from his intention, has performed a schismatical act by the episcopal consecration of 4 priests without pontifical mandate and contrary to the will of the Supreme Pontiff, and therefore has incurred the penalty envisioned by Canon 1364, paragraph 1, and Canon 1382 of the Code of Canon Law. Now, some of the SSPX say, well, that's not a proper use of these canons, so he doesn't fall under that. It is up to the Roman Pontiff to interpret canon law ultimately. He's the ultimate one who promulgates canon law. It's ultimately up to him to determine whether something falls under the canon or not. And he ultimately said, yeah, you're excommunicated. Now, having taken account of all the juridical effects, I declare that the above-mentioned Monsignor Marcel Lefebvre and Bernard Fillet, Bernard Tissier, and Richard Williamson, and Alfonso de Galarreta have incurred ipso facto excommunication, lete sententia reserved to the Apostolic See. Moreover, I declare that Monsignor Antonio Castro de Castro Meyer and Bishop Emeritus of Campos, since he took part directly in the liturgical celebration as co-consecrator and adhered publicly to the schismatical act, has incurred excommunication, lete sententia. The priests and faithful are warned not to support the schism of Monsignor Lefebvre, otherwise they shall incur ipso facto the very grave penalty of excommunication. Now, what some will point to is here you have a lifting of the excommunication of the 4 priests who are consecrated as bishops. And that's true. You do have a lifting of them. Notice here, it says, on the basis of the powers expressly granted to me by the Holy Father Benedict XVI, by virtue of the present decree, I remit the penalty of excommunication, lete sententia, incurred by Bishops Fele, Tissier, Richard Williamson, and Alfonso de Galarreta, and declared by this congregation on July 1st, 1988. Benedict later regretted lifting Richard Williamson's excommunication, as I understand it. At the same time, I declare that as of today's date, the decree issued at that time no longer has juridical effect. Those 4 priests who were made bishops, their excommunication was lifted. Lefebvre's excommunication has never been lifted. Never been lifted to date. This was somebody who did not die in the peace of the church. They died formally excommunicated by the Pope. And hasn't been lifted. Can someone then call him a saint? I don't know how you could call him a saint, unless you say that somebody like, Arius was a saint too. Some will say, well, Arius had some, wrong views. Sure. Mm-hmm. But let's say he was just excommunicated by the church at Nicaea and he didn't have something that denied a dogma. Could we rehabilitate Arius? Can we start to rehabilitate those who have been excommunicated by the church, even though they perhaps didn't hold to any kind of heresies? Dioscorus, for example. Can we say Dioscorus of Alexandria is a saint? It'd be pretty rough to say that one. Now, if you're going to say that Marcel Lefebvre can be a saint prior to the lifting of his excommunication, you need to be able to say the same for Dioscorus of Alexandria. I'm just saying, be consistent. Number two, how do we deal with figures like Palamas, who are saints? Again, they were never formally excommunicated. There's a difference between somebody who was born in schism and not in full communion versus somebody who was in full communion and then went into schism and was excommunicated. There's a fundamental difference between the two. They're not in the same situation. So that's why we can say these things about Gregory of Narek and say, okay, he's a saint. We can say Palamas, he's a saint. Now, if Palamas had been in full communion and was excommunicated, that would be something else. But that wasn't the case. So it's not analogous whenever people point to some of these Eastern saints in the calendar. Not analogous. And then if you're going to say, well, I don't have to have a perfect analogy. Okay, well, do you accept Nestorius as a saint? Nestorius did not hold to Nestorianism. That's pretty clear. The evidence bears that out. He affirmed the orthodox understanding of Theotokos. Are you going to rehabilitate Nestorius? I know some are trying to, but upon what basis would somebody in the SSPX then criticize, or somebody who promotes the SSPX then criticize those who are trying to rehabilitate Nestorius? I mean, just be consistent. Say, you know what? Nestorius might be a saint too. I think that's the problem here. There's a fundamental difference between all of these figures and like St. Gregory the Great. I'm sorry, Palamas, Gregory Palamas, and Gregory of Narek. We got too many Gregories here. It's a fundamental difference there. Not full they weren't in full communion and then excommunicated. Marcel Lefebvre was, and that's never been lifted. I see a couple things here in the chat. Let me grab them. Did he actually say or teach that if you can't go to a CLM, you should stay home, as the SSPX teaches now? The SSPX attributes that position to Lefebvre, and they directly quote him. In fact, I did a review of that video where they're directly quoting him, asserting that and attributing that to him. So the answer would be yes. Saint Charbel, miracle worker. Interesting topic. I wish we would also excommunicate James Martin, Biden, Pelosi, etc., who are leading many souls astray. Look, I'm right there with you. I think we, as I've been saying, need more church discipline all around. Radical traditionalists and really bad liberals. We need it all around. I've been very clear about that. I'm in agreement with you. That's our biggest problem in the church today, is a lack of church discipline. And then if we see church discipline, it's against radical traditionalists. But I want to see it consistent with also radical liberals. That needs to be addressed. Wesley says, why not just give them an interdict? I mean, I would, if you're talking about like the liberals, I'd like to see more discipline than that. But if you're talking about Lefebvre, I mean, he's going against canon law. It's the very definition of schism, a lack of submission to the Roman pontiff. And he was explicitly not submitting himself to the explicit prohibition of the Holy Father. It was completely going contrary to him. That's not the path of sanctity. That's not the path of holiness. So I don't see how one could call a person who explicitly went against the Holy Father, held to very, very problematic theological positions, and then was formally excommunicated by the church. I don't know how we can say they're a saint without rehabilitating Arius or Nestorius or Dioscorus. I don't know upon what basis. Well, those are my thoughts. Wanted to offer this just brief video there. I have to head out, but hopefully this was helpful. As always, as I say, hit that like button, but also let me know your comments there in the comment section. And once again, I appreciate your support. Thank you so much. All right, we'll see you later. God bless.